Hi, everybody. This is Bill Noble from Token Metrics here with our Women's History Month series, welcoming Laura Shin, author and host of the Unchained Podcast. Laura, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about the title, The Cryptopians. It probably sounded better than the history of ETH. How'd you come up with the title and the subtitle?
Well, my editor wanted to focus on the fact that this story was about people and not just kind of like a bloodless technology. And I'm sure have you read the book or?
I've read most of the book.
Okay. So you know from the story that it definitely gets into the personalities involved and kind of, how these people were shaping this technology. And there definitely were elements of idealism, of course, but there were also elements of greed. And at the very end, you find out about some lies. So there's all those components and, it was all mixed up into what happened in that first big ICO craze. So that was how we came up with the title.
All right. So I wanted to ask about the book is so well researched. It's got a big appendix. It's got like a cast of characters. Right. Big reason to buy both the audio and the physical book, which I did. So I used to be a journalist in college, and I'm just wondering, how did you, I know you got the idea for the book, but how did you corral all these people? Did you call these guys up and said, hey, let's write a book? Or, how did all that work?
Well, I interviewed more than 200 people, and I was doing a ton of research online. So much of this was happening online because crypto is a global thing. And so you'll notice that a lot of the action just takes place on Reddit or Twitter or in these blog posts and in these different chat groups, such as at that time, Skype chat groups. And so, I was making like a big timeline of all the events. And then I would ask the different players, what was really going on? Or what were you thinking? Or what were you feeling? Or, what were you guys saying to each other privately? And sometimes they would send me private chats, which I was able to get quite a lot of private communication, which was great. And excellent. I, in some instances was able to get recordings of things, which was even better. So I could have, nice. Verbatim sentences. And I kind of combined it all with the online record and and just was able to tell it kind of moment to moment.
Now in the electronic, the digital copy of the book, you've got links to a lot of the social media posts from back in the day. Is that correct?
Yeah. The one thing I actually didn't realize was I thought that all the links would be clickable, but they're not. But at least you can copy paste. But yeah, there's so many footnotes. I mean, if you're a true crypto nerd, then there's a lot for you in the footnotes because I've got links to all different kinds of blockchain transactions, like on Etherscan, on blockchain.com for like the Bitcoin blockchain. There's even a few that are like Monero or, the Ethereum Classic, like some of the more minor chains. And then I have a lot of links to these social media posts and Wayback Machine links for things that had been deleted and stuff like that.
All right. That's really cool. So speaking of chains, you are the host of the Unchained Podcast, right? I listened to a few of those episodes and, you're sponsored by crypto.com. So I'm like, wow, this is big time. I went back to your LinkedIn, all right, and I saw you started in February 2018. So what was it like to do the podcast in the bear market? Like, how did you get listeners 1 through 1,000 or 1 through 100?
Well, so actually I started the podcast in the summer of 2016.
Okay.
It was essentially, at that time I was freelancing for Forbes and I saw that they had launched a series of podcasts and I was a big fan of podcasts myself. And I said to my editor, hey, I want to start a podcast. So my podcast became the 13th podcast. And I think out of that initial group, it's actually the only one that's still going. But since I was a freelancer, they actually wrote the contract so that I would own the podcast from the beginning. It was just like something where they were rolling it out with their group of podcasts, but I would just own it from the start. And they decided to drop it after the first season, so they weren't funding it anymore. And I found a sponsor who would cover that whole first year of 2017. Or sorry, not the whole first year, but the whole first full year of 2017. And in terms of developing that audience, I mean, it was just a really different time because at that time, there were only a few crypto podcasts. It was like Epicenter, Let's Talk Bitcoin, and they were just different. Epicenter was definitely more for somebody who was kind of more of a developer, like a technical person. And I think mine was the first one that was like really accessible to a mainstream audience. And I think also because I'm a journalist, I was explaining a lot of stuff. And so if a new concept got introduced, I would just make sure that we would explain what that thing was before, going on to discuss it in the conversation. And so I have noticed, I also, though, have this reputation for going kind of deep on the questions and like asking sort of tough questions. And so I've noticed in the surveys, people will say things like, oh, you go really deep. And I love it that you ask tough questions. But I also love it that I can send this to any of my friends that know nothing about crypto and I know that they'll understand it. Which I think is really cool, that like I can both be that kind of intro podcast and yet at the same time, like serve longtime crypto OGs who, want that kind of like intellectual fix and like want to like really dive into the details on things. So, so I've been doing that, now for almost 6 years. It'll be this summer. And there was a point along the way where I launched another podcast called Unconfirmed that was different because so Unchained was just like these hour-long interviews, Q&As. And then Unconfirmed was meant to be more about the news. So it would be a shorter interview, but it would just be on something, relating to the news that week. And ultimately now, because so now we also do videos on YouTube. And since everything was on the same YouTube channel, we just eventually decided to retire the Unconfirmed brand. So everything now is on Unchained, even though it's like two different types of shows. One is the more featurey, evergreen, hour-long interview, and the other is like the newsier short interview.
All right, excellent. So do you have a lot of women who look up to you? Do they communicate with you as a female influencer in crypto? And was there anyone who influenced you, male or female, while you were coming up?
Actually, I have had a lot of women say that to me, which is not something that I thought about or expected. I've especially noticed it more recently, I think, as the space has gotten even bigger and there's more women. But in the beginning, I feel like I don't remember anybody saying that to me, but maybe it's also because there weren't that many women in crypto. And now there's definitely a lot more. I'm not sure if there were any people necessarily that I looked up to, especially in crypto. I mean, maybe I could say that like Kara Swisher was a journalist that I respected. She has covered the tech industry very well for decades. I used to read her work back when I worked at the Wall Street Journal in 2000. But you're very different. Like she, I don't know, in her show, she'll express her own opinions about things. And I tend to actually have very few opinions, frankly, about crypto, which I know might sound weird, but I really don't. And she can be quite critical of the tech industry. And we're very different. So even though I admire her and I look up to her, like I don't necessarily see myself as modeling myself after her.
All right. Good color there. So one thing I noticed when I started to read the book is, Token Metrics is in the altcoin space. And, it seems like every 3 months, a new ETH killer hits the market. And I'm just wondering, with the depth of this history, it seems so difficult to create something like ETH. I mean, do you have a view on this constant, it's the next ETH killer and that whole concept, especially since you wrote the whole, history of Ethereum and, the guys from Cardano and Polkadot came out of this group? Is that something that you talk about or have a view on?
Um, Not necessarily. I mean, there are like the interesting thing is I actually don't think that Cardano or Polkadot, so they're not like the main class of ETH killers. Like there's certain other chains that I feel that probably fit that definition a little bit better. But I wouldn't say that I necessarily look at any of the so-called ETH killers and definitely think that, one of them is going to win or anything like that. My personal opinion probably at the moment is more just what we're seeing is that they're like, for the people who say it's probably going to end up being a multi-chain world, it already looks like that's just taking place. Even if we only look at the two really established chains, which are Bitcoin and Ethereum, then, there you've got two already. And I really don't see how they would ever merge to one. That's just my opinion. I don't. The people that support the two are quite different. They have different reasons for being into them. A lot of people that are into both of them like them for different reasons, because they have different qualities. They have different characteristics. It's just like anything else where to my mind, but Bitcoin and Ethereum are not Coke and Pepsi. It's like, Coke and I don't know, a smoothie or something. Like they're just like totally different niches. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that one of these other ETH killers succeeds, but doesn't actually kill ETH. It just like establishes itself and becomes popular. I really wouldn't be surprised. I don't necessarily think that like there's only going to be one smart contract platform. It could be, and I'm open to that. And if that happens, like, that would be an interesting story. But it could also be an interesting story if we end up with more than one and, there's multiple successful smart contract platforms.
Interesting. So speaking of smart contracts, do you know Vitalik? What can people learn about Vitalik from reading your book, right? In other words, can we get the flavor of, what he's like as a person, I guess, without giving everything away?
Yeah, so people will definitely learn a lot more about Vitalik than I think they will from any other resource. I did many interviews with him. He starts the book at the age of 19, and he's quite not only immature, but he really doesn't have much experience socially. And what I mean by that is, he told me things like about how when he was a child, he didn't have many friends. And he was actually shocked when he was in junior high to find out that his classmates were hanging out with each other on weekends and after school. He actually didn't even know that they were doing that. And he then, of course, through Ethereum, gets all these people that want to get in on Ethereum for their own probably self-interested reasons. But he had so little experience with people that he didn't even understand that people could be like that they could be opportunistic in that way. And it took him quite a while. My book spans from when he initially conceived of Ethereum, actually even before, it goes back to his childhood, but the action really is, from when, or really actually like when he first started getting into Bitcoin in 2011, I think it was, and goes all the way up to 2018. And in that period of time, he grew a lot as a person. He began to understand, oh, okay, just because somebody's nice to you doesn't mean that they're necessarily nice to you just because they want to be. They could be doing it for reasons to benefit them. He literally would say, like, that's something major that I learned. And, it's kind of surprising that somebody that age it would take them until that age to learn that, but maybe not. I don't know. I'm also from the Midwest, and I feel like I was kind of innocent when I, was in my early 20s. But yeah, by the end, he's definitely matured. And when I wrote the book, when I went to write the book, I didn't have any awareness that the book was going to have this trajectory of Vitalik's life. And so by the end of it, it actually really felt like the book itself is kind of a coming of age story for Vitalik, which I didn't know until I did the reporting for the book that was going to be the case, but I could see that very clearly. And he grew in a lot of ways by the end of the book, and people will read about that. It's really interesting to see kind of how he changed as a person.
Interesting. One thing I noticed is that, Vitalik's relationship with, say, with Joe was, let's
Joe
just call
Lubin.
it unique. Yes. So it was very unique. I remember seeing him speak at South by Southwest. And one of the things that I got the flavor from the book and that a lot of people talked about is that, this wound up being kind of exciting, Game of Thrones type moments. I mean, did you expect that? Did you just like go, wow, I've got all this great content? Was it literary genius, luck? Tell me.
So some of that was actually known before my book came out, but I do think I have a level of detail about that other people don't have, because it turned out that there were some kind of like lower level people in Ethereum at the time who kind of manipulated things to basically kick out some members that they were unhappy with and they felt were actually a threat to Ethereum itself. So, I had kind of gotten an inkling about some of it from some sources, but the depth of it, no, I had no idea. I mean, I only got that depth by interviewing, dozens of people, frankly, because at that point, there were so many people in Ethereum, even that early on. So I must have done. So that day in the house, I think there were like maybe, I don't know, in the ballpark of 20-ish people. And I interviewed a huge percentage of those people. And even if one of them would say, oh, so-and-so said blah, 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 I would then go around to a whole bunch of other people and say, did so-and-so say da-da-da? And just trying to get the pieces where like multiple people remember that or, whatever it was. So, from that, I was kind of able to try to piece it together better than just like, and then for there are times you'll notice in the book where I'll say like one person said, XYZ because we only had it from one. But then there were times when just somebody had a very specific memory of something. And if it was the case, like there's one instance I'm thinking of where somebody was only in this house one time and they remembered an event from that. And like, other people didn't, but I was like, okay, they were only there once. So their only memory of ever being there, like they remember that this thing happened. So then it was just very clear, like, okay, that's probably very reliable because they wouldn't be mixing it up with any other day or anything like there were other times when people who lived in that house had memories and they were like, oh, at this event, da, da, da. But then when I checked it out, because for instance, there's a couple of people, they said, oh, this person named Alex was at this meeting and he said, da, da, da. I checked with Alex. He was like, no. I was moving across the country that day. I wasn't even in Switzerland. He was like, I was moving between Texas and this other state. So then I just knew, okay, that's not reliable. It must have been some other meeting on a different day, but they're just mixing up the dates. So.
All right. So I know you can't answer this, but what's next for you on the literary front? Are you doing fiction, nonfiction? Are you the world's official crypto historian? How has your brand changed and what's the next evolution of your brand? If you can't tell me about the next book, which I know you can.
Yeah. So obviously I'm not going to make any announcements right now, but obviously I definitely would like to work on another book. I had so much fun writing this book. I absolutely loved it. And I do think the fact that I was able to identify somebody that is a credible figure for being behind the DAO attack probably has changed my reputation in some way. And I've noticed nobody has pushed back on that since I reported that. And I think most people seem to find that the evidence is very strong. That person denies it. But, other than that, like everybody was like, oh yeah, this evidence is very good. And in all ways, it's like the piece of the evidence just linking us to that identity, but then all the circumstantial stuff, like the fact that they were into the DAO at that time and that they were talking about all the flaws in it and they were writing Slack comments about the flaws in it. And then they were emailing the creators about the flaws in it. And then they were writing blog posts about the flaws in it. And then after the attack, they were kind of on the side of like not hard forking because they wanted to maintain the fallout from the hack, et cetera, et cetera. There were just a lot of things. So, I do think that probably people, like I've noticed, from the queries that I'm getting, people are saying, oh, can you investigate this for me? Can you investigate that for me? And I want to do it. So if you have an idea, let me know.
All right. So speaking of investigate, I know that you worked with Chainalysis, right? To investigate, the DAO hack in Ethereum, right? Which you wrote a Forbes article about, which everybody should go check out. But how did that work with Chainalysis? Did you call them up and say, hey guys, can you give me access to the super spooky tools to figure this out? Or how did you do that?
So they actually had been helping me throughout the book for a lot of things, like even just tell me how much ETH was in the Ethereum Foundation's multi-sig on any given day, or tell me kind of like how much Bitcoin came into the Ethereum crowd sale, like on any given day, and what the exchange rate was, like things like that. Just all kinds of things for any data throughout the book. Like there was just a list that I gave them initially, and then they kind of provided all that. And then what happened was I got some additional data, like a report about how this person was cashing out their Ethereum Classic coins. And I pinpointed, certain things that I just wanted to follow. And yeah, I didn't know they had the demixing capability, but they followed that trail. They saw that Wasabi wallet was used, these coin joins to obscure the trail. And then they saw that the output went to 4 exchanges. And so I was able to get a source to find out from one of the exchanges what happened to the deposited Bitcoin. So by the way, this was a very weird thing because I had to reach out to so many people at all these different exchanges to try to get somebody to tell me like what happened to the Bitcoins on there. And that was just so there. Thank you to all the random people who had never heard of me before or knew or didn't know who I was, who took my calls. They didn't necessarily give me information, but yeah, I was like just trying desperately to track down anybody. But the point is that this other source confirmed that on this one particular exchange, the money was converted to Grin and then withdrawn to grin.toby.ai. And the sources I was working on this with, we all looked at the IP address for that and saw that there were Bitcoin Lightning nodes on that IP address. And when we looked at that IP address on a Bitcoin Lightning Explorer, then we saw one of the nodes was named 10x. And then, yes, when you look at 10x, you see the co-founder and CEO is named Toby Honish, and his Reddit handle and Twitter handle and Stack Overflow and GitHub and AngelList and pretty much every single alias he used on every platform, the alias he used on every single platform was Toby.ai. And then a couple of weeks after that, I found out that the email address used on that account at that exchange was the name of the name of the exchange at Toby.ai. So again, it was very, very strong evidence. I felt very confident about it. So is law enforcement on board with your evidence? Can you talk about that? So I just published the information, and that area is kind of not. It's like multiple people. Like I had people tweeting at me saying that I messed up an investigation because I should have told law enforcement, but like. I don't even know if it's legal. Do you know what I mean? Like this is just beyond my area, my scope. So, I've done my part and the information's out there, and I personally think the evidence is very good. So, whether or not somebody does anything else, like, I'm sure there are people much smarter than me that know whether or not this is actionable, but at least I presented the evidence.
Well, if it's, if there's a perp walk, you will be probably legendary because, that the value of that ETH was what from your podcast is now like, double digit billions, 10, $11 billion, right?
So yeah, if Ethereum had not hard forked, then the amount of Ether that this person stole would be 11 billion. If you just use a $3,000 figure, we had to just pick a round number because we couldn't just publish it with whatever the price was on the day it published, because we had to like button things up beforehand and for various reasons. So the day it actually published, I think it would have been a different number, but we had to just go with a number while we were editing it and working on it. But since Ethereum hard forked, what they have left is Ether Classic, and that's worth 100 million, which is still a lot of money. It doesn't ring quite the same as $11 billion.
Right.
But regardless, you can see, I mean, it was a huge percentage of all Ether at that time. It was 5% of all Ether at the time, 3.64 million coins. So
Wow.
That's just a lot, for any one person to have.
So one spicy question, the more I learned about Vitalik, I couldn't help but wonder what his meeting
you're frozen, but I don't
a
know
while back with Mr. Putin was like. I mean, do you know enough about Vitalik, or, do you have any idea? I mean, other than, let's explore a way to get off the dollar. Understandable, right? I mean, do you have any idea what that meeting was like?
Wait, I'm so sorry because you froze. So I actually missed the whole first half of the question.
All right, I'm sorry. I'll do it again. So
okay.
A little bit of a spicy question. The more I learned about Vitalik in your book, the more I began to wonder what it was like when he actually had that meeting with Mr. Putin, right? I'm sure Mr. Putin wanted, to diversify ways people could pay for things, or do you know anything about that?
No, I didn't ask him about that. So I can't really opine, but my guess is that it was probably not super substantive. That's just my, I feel like it might have come up casually in conversation once. And I think he might have been like, oh, this was more photo op type thing.
Okay.
I don't remember. Yeah. But.
All right. I know that was spicy, and I appreciate you at least try to give me an idea on that one. So, Laura, tell us about the book again. Tell people where they can get, audio, digital, et cetera, and tell people where they can find you on your podcast and your Twitter.
Yeah. So you can buy the book anywhere that books are sold. It's called The Cryptopians, and the website that's pretty easy to access is just bit.ly/cryptopians, bit.ly/CRYPTOPIANS. And you can follow me on Twitter at Laura Shin. And I also have a website, laurashin.com. And you can also follow my podcast at Unchained_pod on Twitter, or unchainedpodcast.com. And through unchainedpodcast.com, we do a newsletter every Monday through Friday. And I also do an additional newsletter through Bulletin, which is laurashin.bulletin.com. And there's a premium offering where you can sign up and get access to a bunch of content that I do not release on the shows.
Oh, excellent. All right, Laura, we appreciate you having you on the show. That's it for today, right? Our Women's History Month specials reports, right? I'm your host, Bill Noble, and we will see you next time.